I thought about it. I overthought it.
Okie dokie. So if you sit down, relax, everyone. If you're a Buddhist, you do your prostrations, Lord. That's right. There's a protocol. Okay, I better stop showing my navel to the people. Hello, everybody. I'm here. There we go. That's it. Okie doke. Did anybody die? I know it's a joke, but it's not a joke. And I forgot to tell you last night your homework, which was if you wake up in the morning, which kind of is always like a joke because we think we will, then you think, wow, amazing, like a bonus, another day, you know. All right. So let's continue our conversation. About death, how to prepare for it, and why is the key point. Otherwise, just wasting time, you know. There's not a valid reason, a proper reason. So we just think, we're here together to listen, think about, contemplate, analyze, you know, internalize if we choose. We're the boss, not Buddha. Any of this information, you know, I always say you can be a 1% Buddhist, it's perfectly fine. But it's advice. What we're discussing is advice. It's up to us to understand it and take it if we'd like and put it into practice. So that we can, in general, we can develop our own amazing potential. So then we can be of use to others. But it needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. Okay. So what we're discussing is the Buddhist approach to death, what it is and how to prepare for it and why should we want to is the point, isn't it? I mean, if you think, you know, like we've been talking, there's different things. If you're a philosophical materialist, there's good reason to prepare for death because, you know, you're preparing what you want to leave behind and you want to leave something nice behind. Nothing wrong with that. Make the world a better place. Nothing wrong with that. Christian view is you want to prepare for death because you want to go to heaven with God. Nothing wrong with that. The Buddhist view is so you can continue, you know, on your path, this long-term goal. If you're on the Mahayana path, you're on this long-term goal, the end result of which is called Buddhahood. Buddha, it's a word in Sanskrit. Actually, it's very simple. It's a psychological state. It's a mind. It's a state of mind. And really, these two syllables, the etymology is very tasty. Buddha, I think in the Tibetan, the Sangye, I think I've heard this. The first syllable implies the eradication. These are the words. The eradication, the utter eradication from one's mind or one's consciousness of all neuroses, all ego grasping, all the misconceptions, all the delusions, all the emotional afflictions, which the Buddha has found from his own experience are not at the core of our being. This is the essence of the Buddhist approach. You know, this underpins all practice. Well, if you'd like, that's the development of the wisdom wing. If you've cut all the delusions, you've achieved your own cessation of suffering and its causes, nirvana. That's what it refers to. It's not some place like heaven. Not only that, da or ge, the second syllable, and this is the compassion wing, if you like, speaking roughly, is the development, literally, to perfection of everything else in your mind, all the goodness, all the virtue, all the kindness, love, compassion, wisdom, clarity, contentment, all of this. This is the Buddha's view. That's the potential of every being, necessarily. If you exist, if you have a mind, if you're a mind possessor, if you're a sentient being, and there are trillions of them, Buddha would suggest, that's your potential. That's your true nature, if you like. That's who you really are. You're not it yet. That's what defines your existence. I like to, they talk about we all possess Buddha nature. We don't talk like that, but if you think about it, I always think of an acorn, because it's a very vivid looking, a very particular kind of seed, isn't it? We know it. And if you don't know what it is, it just looks like a little kind of oval thing. I don't think it's oval. I asked a mathematician once what the name of that shape was. They gave me some fancy Greek word, I can't remember it, or Latin, one or the other. But we know when you learn, oh, what's that, mummy? It's a seed. What's seed? What for, darling? What's for? And she'll say, well, there, see that thing over there called an oak tree? That's a seed that if you give it all the right conditions and a bit of time, it'll turn into that. Big surprise. It's not evident, is it? Well, that's the Buddha, what he's saying is, the Buddha's view. We all possess Buddha nature. So what you can say is very simply, we don't talk this way, but we get it. All acorns possess oak tree nature. That's the way of putting it. That's how they talk. By definition, what an acorn is a potential oak tree. So for the Buddha, by definition, a mind, a consciousness, is a potential Buddha. And all the teachings in Buddha's methodology on the Mahayana path are methods to help that, to develop that, get rid of all the rubbish and perfect all the goodness. In essence, it's that. Hardly a complicated concept, just a radically different concept, a shocking concept. Because in the modern world, in our psychological models and in neuroscientific models, we absolutely do not posit that possibility. Sounds like mental illness, sounds like you've got to cut half your brain out. So we've got to really think about what Buddha means by this. So from the Buddhist perspective, if you're on the Buddhist path and you're on this Mahayana path, you've got this long-term goal. You've got this long-term goal, which means could be many, many lifetimes. It's always spoken in terms of many lifetimes. I remember talking to some Lutherans in Kathmandu one time at our centre. They came along and they wanted to know a bit about Buddhism. So we're talking about different views and we discussed this bodhisattva attitude, the attitude of the Mahayana path, that you want to become, what propels you, what motivates you to want to have this goal of Buddhahood, life after life, is that you want to become a Buddha because then you don't need to be reborn. Now you've done the job. You're out of here. You're finished. You quit samsara completely. You don't need a body. You don't need a bag of bones. Your mind now is a Buddha mind that pervades the universe, all pure, subtle, all pure, all manifesting, all pervasive, blah, blah, blah. But you want to come back again and again into the world to benefit sentient beings. I mean, this fellow, he was shocked. He said, no way do I want that, he said. It was very clear. I want to go to heaven with God after I die, he said. So it's a very different view, you know. Come back again and again and again. What a drag, you know. But they say what motivates that is this compassion for the suffering of sentient beings. Compassion. Bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So if you like this earlier stages of practice, if you're just on the Hinayana path, you would just do the wisdom wing. You develop incredible love and compassion, but you don't focus on that in the second mode. You don't keep coming back and developing more and more of this compassion. Once you've quit samsara, you're out of here, honey, as quick as possible. Well, actually, you've accomplished your own potential. You've accomplished your own liberation from suffering. But you're in the compassion mix, you add the compassion wing to it, then you develop this outrageous levels of love and compassion for all suffering sentient beings, and want to only keep coming back in different bodies, in different forms, in different worlds to be of benefit to them. That's how they talk. So this is a kind of the background to what is behind the idea of death. Death is this boring, inconvenient thing that happens. You've got to chuck out this one boring body and get another one so you can carry on your path. So the broader view is, you know, to prepare for this event. And this loosens the grip of just this one life, one me, one death, panic-stricken blah. It's kind of death's this drag that you've got to go through. And so the more together you can be, the more wise you can do, the more you can navigate it so you don't waste any time. So you can die well, ensure one of your virtuous karmic seeds is triggered, and then get another decent human body with and carry on your spiritual path in an unbroken way as well as you can. That's the long-term goal. That's the perspective that one would take, you know. So what is death then? So what is death? Well, death is a separation of mind and body. So if you're a Christian, it's a separation of body and soul, isn't it? You know, materialist view is just the end of, it's just the end of you, period, done, you turn into dust. Different views, isn't it? So here we're taking the Buddhist view, and particularly expressed in the Vajrayana Buddhist view, which is the view of the Tibetan Buddhist. There's different levels of Buddhism taught in different cultures. So, okay, in the Vajrayana model of a person, how they describe mind, more broadly, the universe itself, the physical world, this is the general Buddhist view, consists of two things basically. There's matter and there are minds, and that's it. There are many universes, meaning not like different planets the way we talk. Yeah, there are planets, but they don't mean it like that. The different realms of existence, a bit like, I never watched it, but I heard about where you get into an elevator and you come out in another dimension. What's that show?
Doctor Who.
Who?
Doctor Who.
Oh, was it? I thought it was the other one with the pointy ears. I thought it was that one. No, not that one. What did they go to different dimensions?
It could be the holodeck on the next generation.
Could be, yeah, that's right. That's the one. Yeah, that's the one. There you go. So it's different dimensions. Well, that's really the way Buddha's talking. There are different dimensions of existence. So in other words, we're caught up in the human realm, and because of the human imprints and the human instincts and our conceptuality, we can't see other levels of reality. So of course, the materialist view only posits the human one, don't we? We know there are animals and creatures, but if we can't see it with this mind, it doesn't exist. We can't see it with a microscope, it doesn't exist, isn't it? That's how we think. But the Buddhist view is a question of perspective, a question of karmic imprints. The different levels of reality. This is part of from the bigger picture point of view of the whole universe, what it is and what Buddha means by samsara and happiness and suffering. And this is a big picture point of view. So let's just discuss that for a minute, because this plays a big role in this Buddhist perspective of your relationship to death and the types of rebirth you want and so on and so forth. So again, let me remind you, where does information come from? Like I said, the only person who's ever asked me that question, I find it very fascinating, and he was a scientist. Who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? It's such a brilliant question. And of course, it's a natural question we have because we assume all religion is from on high. Revelation, by definition. Revelation, not experiential. That's the radical difference, isn't it? Well, that's the Buddha's point. He's more like Einstein. Oops, I'm bashing my glasses this time. I've got to leave things, I'm always bashing something. They're a bit fragile, I better be careful. I can get space so I can punch and hit. So, I forgot what I said now. Never mind. I just find it necessary to remember. If you're reading Einstein for the first time, you've never heard of 1 + 1, you've never heard of math, you've never heard of anything, and he starts talking about these weird things and these strange abstract concepts, you think, who is this nut? Isn't it? But we hear that the guy's a scientist. Oh, wow, that's important. He's an intelligent fellow. He's thought it through. This is interesting. Let's have a look at this. We don't think of religion like that because we think it's all made up, isn't it? We think it's made up or from on high and you've got to believe it. We have this very deep in our bones, I think. So I think it's good to remember that what is being purported here, what is being said here, is that every word that is, if it's valid Buddhism, and believe me, there's junk written, that people just make up what they think it means. It's so rude, you know. We think we're allowed to do that. It's religion, you can do what you like. But if it is valid Buddhism, you've got to track it back. Where's it come from, this information? It's just exactly the same as a recipe book. If I open this book and I see a recipe, I know it's come from the book, the person who wrote it. He didn't just have a dream and write a thing called a recipe. You said, we know that. And where'd it come from? Guess what? His mum taught him. And where'd she get it from? Her mum. Where'd she get it from? Her mum. There's an internal lineage of knowledge holders that are passing on knowledge about cakes. That's knowledge. That's what we mean by knowledge. If it is just made up, which is how we think of religion, that's mental illness. That's conspiracy theories. Go join MAGA, whatever you call it. Do you understand? Or the QAnon, all these people. Just make it up. You make it up as you go along. Then it's true. That's what we think of religion. It's so shocking, so irresponsible to think like that. We're discussing reality, discussing knowledge. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to believe it. That's why I think it's all these people all over the planets, all over the years, humans have been using their noggins to think about the meaning of life. Well done. Well done. I respect that, you know. So here we're discussing the Buddha's take on the universe. It's up to us if we like it or not like it, or look into it or believe it. Not believe it. No, that's wasting time. That's intellectual laziness. So, okay. So from the Buddhist perspective, this person, coming from his direct observation, and anybody since then who's followed Buddha's methodology has found this to be true as well. Or, as the Dalai Lama points out to us modern people, if you start following Buddha's methodology, as you go, you tick the boxes, don't you? Like, you want to know that E equals MC squared, so you start with 1 + 1 is 2, and you learn it and you tick it. Oh, that was right. Now you go to the next bit, now you go to multiplication, now you go to the more complicated. Each step of the way, you're internalizing the knowledge, you're ticking the boxes, you're moving forward. And if you get to a point where it is definitely wrong, what Einstein told you, of course you must reject it. And he'd be the first person to be happy because he's trying to find reality. That's the Buddha's one. So as the Dalai Lama says, if you find the Buddha's wrong from your own experience, or just think it's wrong because you don't like it, you must reject the Buddha. Of course you must. That's pretty intense, because that means you've got to engage in it, not just like it, pop it in your little pocket and think, oh, I believe in reincarnation. That's just intellectual laziness. It won't get you anywhere. I believe 1 + 1 is 2. Who cares? Experience is the point. Reality. The trouble is, I think, when it comes to religious views of reality and religion, we think it's dogmatic. You've got to believe it. Then we get upset. When it comes to scientific view, we know it means you use your intelligence, and whether they're discussing what they think is real because they found it and they've presented it. So we kind of don't mind hearing science. Religion is made up, we think. It's really, so we're so superstitious, So Buddha's telling us his view of how things exist. How things exist. He's not asking us to believe a single word. He's presenting his findings. That's it. Then he says, over to you, honey child. If you want to have this, get this goal as well, I'm telling you this is what I've achieved. This is your method. It's up to us. You buy into it or not, Think it through, analyze it, experience the truth of it each step of the way, ticking the boxes. So, okay, according to the Buddhist view then, this particular way of talking, this view, the Buddha, there's physical and there's mental. Physical, there's no component called a soul or a spirit. I mean, the Greeks call it an essence. The Muslims call it a soul, I think. The Christians call it a soul. The Hindus call it an atman, a self. All say meaning, something intrinsic in there. Buddha doesn't say there's no self. He doesn't say there's no thing. It's the way it exists that's the distinction, So anyway, there's body, there's physical, and there's mental. So from this perspective, the physical, and this is how we used to talk in our culture a few hundred years ago, it's made of the 4 elements. Hardly complicated. Earth, air, fire, water. That's still the model they use. Earth, air, fire, water. 4 elements. The entire physical universe is constructed of the 4 elements. Configurations of the 4 elements. And then you have minds, trillions upon countless, trillions upon countless, trillions of minds, consciousnesses, mind streams, they say, rivers of mental moments, mental continuum, these terms they use, in that sense that this moment of my consciousness is coming from the millionth of a second, but the previous moment of my consciousness, which comes from the previous moment of my consciousness, which comes from the previous moment of my consciousness, this unbroken chain of mental moments, back and back and back, and then indeed forward, forward, forward. This is the way to think about it. So the mind of the Buddha, like we've been saying, is not itself physical, exists at a grosser level interdependently with the body and the brain, no problem. But it's not itself the brain, not itself physical, is not a function of the physical. Again, like I like to say, not insulting neuroscientists, but you could argue the brain, for example, and the genes and the DNA, all the physical, are physical indicators of what's going on in the mind. That's a good way to put it, I think. So mind is not physical. Mind is not the handiwork of a creator. That's a nutty idea for the Buddha. Not being rude if you have faith in a creator. Not the handiwork of your mummy and daddy. Your body, yeah. They didn't do much. They just had sex and the egg and sperm came together. Then it did its own trip, isn't it? But the consciousness, the Buddha's view is, your consciousness is its own entity, its own continuity of mental moments. Like I said, if you could track back, well, if you just intellectually track back till conception, just intellectualizing, We know he came from the egg and the sperm. Well, the moment before, the egg was in the mummy's body, the sperm was in the daddy's body. But the mind, where was that? It came from a previous moment of itself before it was in that egg and sperm, a subtle level of consciousness, And this is where we're going to discuss the death process and the rebirth process. So from this perspective, we've got gross consciousness. Remember, the word consciousness is not a qualitative thing. It's simply another word for mind. Okay, let's just stop. What's the mind? How do we define it? What is it? Is it good to think about? What is it? What's the mind? It's not the brain, then what the hell is it, So there's a very interesting point, because the Buddha's one approach to the whole of Buddhism is learning to get in touch with reality. Why? Because he's saying these neurotic states of mind we have, these misconceptions about reality, misconceptions, emotional afflictions, all these different things, they are not in touch with reality. They blind us from reality, and they cause us to suffer, and they cause us to harm others. And this is what Buddha's methodology is about, sorting those out, getting rid of those, so we're in touch with reality. See reality for what it is. See everything as it is, exists. This is what Buddha says. So, where was I? So, okay, we've got different levels. Okay, the mind, good. So then in order, if he says, if we are not in touch with how things exist, he's saying we misconceive things. We don't see things properly, we don't see things clearly. For example, I don't know, my thermos, for example. He's saying that we have in the mind. Okay, never mind that. If we're misconceiving things, then and he says there are methods of learning to discover how things do exist. And why would you want to do that first? Because that's the source of your happiness, the source of your eradication of suffering. And then you add the compassion mix to it, and then you become a Buddha and can benefit others, because we're all in the same boat, all living in La La Land, up a creek without a paddle, up a garden path, lost. So if it's true, we've got misconceptions that blind us from reality, and we have to see how things exist, then we first should establish what we're talking about first. So that means, Buddha talks about conventional reality and ultimate reality. So conventional reality is there are millions of phenomena in the universe. There's a thermos and a microphone and a mala and a computer. I mean, look at it, endless. And every day we're coming up with new phenomena. I think since Steve Jobs, we've multiplied 4 billion times the existence of phenomena, just called apps alone, There are so many phenomena, things that exist. So before we start discussing how things exist, and before we start discussing where we make mistakes about how things exist, we've got to ground it in some conventional reality. So then what's that, Mummy? Well, we need a definition. So that's called a thermos. That's its name. So then she has to give you the definition. Well, what is it? Well, she'll tell you the first part of the definition, which is this, well, you can see, darling, it's this flat-bottomed metal tube. You can see, can't you? And I'll see that. That's the first part of the definition. It's conventional characteristics. But the crucial point is, and this is massive in terms of getting in touch with reality, eventually ultimate reality. But Mummy, what is it? What does it do? What does it mean? That's a good point. What does it mean? What does it do? What's its function? Well, honey, it keeps my tea warm. That's it. That's its job. Its function, what it does, its meaning. That's what it is in its bones. A keeping warmer of tea, whatever the right word is. But don't believe her. This is the thing. We believe anything anyone tells us. Don't believe. She's got to prove it. This is a really powerful point, even conventionally. She's got to prove it to you. So she'll get her tea, take the lid off, pour the tea in all hot, put the lid back on. We come back 2 hours later. She takes off the lid. The tea's still warm. She just proved it's a thermos. It fit the definition. This is conventional reality. Now, Buddha's saying, not only do we not know ultimate reality, but we don't even know conventional reality. We make up new things every day. We believe everything we're told. We're living in La La Land. So at least getting conventional reality clear, we're already calming ourselves down, Because in the mind, we have all these emotional misconceptions, emotional problems called anger and attachment and jealousy. And these are really intense ones that really lead us up garden paths, that really misrepresent reality to us. So in other words, if I've got massive attachment, for example, we're going to go to what attachment is. for this thermos, it's going to appear to me as the most divine, delicious thermos, vibrating delicious, as just begging me to use it and look at it and touch it and bring it to bed every day, you know? Because one of the signs of attachment is you want to be around the object all the time because it looks so divine, you believe it's the cause of your happiness. Well, that's fantasy. It's a rubbish. It's embellishment. That's not the thermos at all. And I adore it so much because my beloved gave it to me. But if my beloved leaves me today, tomorrow, that thermos will look repulsive and I want to throw it in the bin with him. Because now I've got aversion in my mind and now I see it through the lenses of my aversion and it's disgusting. We live like this. One crazy one, like drunken sailors between these crazy views. This is how Buddha says we suffer, you know. So reality is it is a thermos. It does hold my tea warm and she's proved it, but it's still not enough to really prove conventionally that's what it is. So you've got to check that in the world that we know, there's no other conflicting definition of such a thing. Then we can tick the box, agree, shake hands, now we agree on a thermos. And you say, pass me that black thermos and I'll pass you the black thermos. Because we're all communicating. My God, if life were like that, we'd all be in heaven. Because we've got the same definitions. We all see relative reality, good enough already. But there's still more to go. So, okay, so now, what's down here? Okay, so what is the mind? Well, the definition of mind's got two parts as well. The first part tells you its conventional characteristics, and that's summarized by the word clarity, which sounds kind of cute, or luminous. That sounds even more fantastic. But it just means not physical. Not physical. Not physical, that's all. Now, space is also not physical, so that's not enough to tell you the definition. What's the second part of the definition of mind tells you its job, its function. What does it do? It cognizes. It knows, it is aware. These are three synonyms, all the same, those verbs. That's the job of your mind. That's the job of your mind. To know what, and then you say, Buddha, well, please, Buddha, know what? Cognize what? Well, guess what, honey child? He will say, that which exists. Why he's telling us that is, like I said, right now, our minds are cognizing things that don't exist. I'm not talking about extreme QAnon conspiracy theories. I'm even talking about the cake, forget the thermos, but the cake, you know, more intense, or the divine boyfriend, that cake on the plate. That it is a chocolate cake, it is triangle, it is brown, tick, tick, tick. But the cake that appears to you when you've got your attachment glasses on and the cake that exists on that plate are not the same. So this is what Buddha's saying. There's this constant disconnect between what does exist and how we perceive existence. And that's what being in samsara means. And that is why we suffer. And he's got methods for how to get rid of that, to change the mind, to be in touch, to remove the layers of veils from your eyes so you see reality as it is. I mean, it sounds all very cosmic, reality as it is. Wow, 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 you know. Don't get carried away with it. I mean, it's a very interesting viewpoint. I think we can prove it pretty quickly. We know that cake. Don't worry about the boyfriend. The boyfriend might take a few weeks before you get bored by the boyfriend. Look in the bed one day. Who's this ugly looking bloke? Get out of my bed. Before that, he was like so divine, you faint just at his name. What's the difference? One day attachment, next day aversion. You run from pillar to post between these crazy views, you know. So the mind cognizes. Well, the lovely way they talk about mind, Lama Yeshe talks about this in Mahamudra, his lovely book, Mahamudra, How to Discover Our True Nature. It's a really nice way to see the mind, because we don't think of it this way. The mind is like a mirror. The mind cognizes as a mirror does. This is very surprising. We see it as me, then there's a thing out there, you know. And then that thing exists like that. That cake exists like that. From its own side, in and of itself, right there. As if you put a spoon of deliciousness in along with the chocolate. That's the nature of cake. That's the big mistake. The Buddha says we see it all out there, having nothing to do with me as the observer. Buddha says it's the exact opposite. You know? So, as they say, as Lama puts it, you know, whatever is out there, if your mind's a mirror, it's obvious that the state of your mirror, clean, cloudy, dirty, whatever, totally determines what appears to you. It's a very powerful concept. So when your mirror is dirty with attachment, the object will look divine. When your mirror is dirty with aversion, the object will look ugly. And we forget, in each case, you know, they're projections of our mind, but we think it's the object. We know this. We don't join the dots, you know. Everything exists. This is an analogy of how things exist finally, ultimately, as an illusion, they say, like a dream, like a mirror. Things exist according to, as Lama Zopa puts it, as they say in Buddhist psychology, what exists out there, it appears back to us in the aspect of whatever's in our mind. This is so delicious, and it's the essential Buddhist point. Mind's like a mirror. So the Buddha's telling us, from his view, that all happiness, all suffering, the main source is what's in our mind. This is a big shock to us. So when we say it's in the mind, what we mean in the West is, oh, it's all in the mind. We mean it literally doesn't exist. Oh, it's all in your mind. It's like it literally, I mean, it's so nihilistic, it's shocking. You understand? It's fascinating. Therefore, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what's in the mind. We think this way. This is so mind-boggling if we compare with the Buddha's view. It means as long as no one knows what I think, it doesn't matter. I remember a woman in Brooklyn years ago got into her husband's computer and discovered he's part of a cannibal site. And they were planning to kill and eat her. Can you imagine? She called the FBI, not even the police, you know. Now, his defense lawyers, this is the point. His defense lawyer says it doesn't matter what they think, they're allowed to think this. It doesn't mean they're going to do it. Meaning we don't think that what goes on in our mind plays any role in what we do in our lives. I mean, if that's not schizophrenic, I don't know what is. But that's what we believe. I mean, anybody with half a brain can think of it through and realize it's absurd, you know. Or we say, oh, I can think what I like, meaning it doesn't matter what I think, meaning whatever I think doesn't have consequences, meaning it's just existing self-existently. Well, the Buddha's view says bare bones, cause and effect. This is the law of karma. Everything you think necessarily is the process that produces you. Like I said about turning yourself into a musician or a carpenter. You can't just say, oh, I can think what I like about carpentry. You can, but you won't be a carpenter. You'll just make a mess. I can make it 7 inches long if I want to, or the building will collapse. But we don't realize when it comes to happiness and suffering. That's the eye-opener for me. I think it's mind-boggling. It's fascinating. It doesn't matter what I think. Okay, so Buddha's deal opposite. So the mind's like a mirror, and whatever's out there appears to us in the aspect of what's in the mirror. The mirror's dirty. Like I think of a body of water. The water's still. The trees reflected accurately, aren't they? But as soon as the water's turbulent, the tree would look crooked. So we never, see, this is the thing that sounds a bit abstract, but the level of mind that we exist at, we're going to go into this a bit, well, I'll go into it now. We have a subtle level of cognition, and we have a grosser level, and we live at the gross level. When you've got single point of concentration, when you've got shamatha, calm abiding, this genius technique these Indians invented well before the Buddha, which Buddha took with him as one of the central techniques in Buddhism. If you've accomplished that, you mean you've accessed a subtler level of your mind. You're beyond conceptual, beyond the sensory. You've got this subtle level of direct perception. You can eventually get direct perception, direct non-conceptual perception. It's abstract for us because we can't posit it, we can't imagine what it is. When you got that, and again, I'm sorry, my sentence was so long I forgot the beginning of it. Yeah, we live at the grosser level. So the grosser level is just conceptuality. Conceptuality, this is what's shocking to us. We live at the level of conceptuality. And that doesn't just mean up here in the head. 1 + 1 is 2, or that's conceptual, but love and compassion and hate, or that's emotional. They're all rooted in being conceptual. And when we can get this, we're really on track with understanding Buddhism, Buddhist psychology, you know. So the way it is with the mirror, the water example, the trees on the bank are there. That's reality. Then all we can see is a reflection. We don't see the reality. This is the way it is with conceptuality. We don't cognize a tree. We don't cognize a cup. We see a reflection in our mind of a cup through the reflection of what's in our mind. So we're never seeing reality. Buddhist epistemology is fascinating. Scientists would love it. You just have to posit that you're not talking about the brain, and that's the big shift, We're just seeing a reflection. We're seeing the reflections of according to what's in our mind. So Buddha says at the moment that even, that we're the delusions, in the Buddhist view of the mind, the mental consciousness, you've got sensory consciousness and you have mental consciousness. Sensory consciousness and mental consciousness. Now this is a massive distinction, and it's quite an eye-opener if we really get it. And I use this example all the time, but it's very powerful if we can get it. I'm sure I mentioned it. Sensory consciousness is profoundly limited, but we make the body the boss, as Lama Yeshe says, We just think of ourselves as this big lump of me, this physical lump plodding through life. So we have sensory consciousness, I consciousness, that, to be precise, that part of my mind working through the medium of the eyeball, the nerves, and all the bits and pieces working nicely, cognizes, has a cognition. Every part of our mind cognizes something. Every part of our mind, gross, subtle, conceptual, sensory, more subtle, very subtle, all have, there's mind, subject, and then there's object. There's a thing that it cognizes. So here, simply speaking, eye consciousness, I will say, what a nicely designed thermos. We think my eyeball is seeing that. No, your eye consciousness is not even seeing it. Your eye consciousness can only cognize two things. This is really telling. Shape and color. That's it. So what part of my mind then cognizes a nicely designed thermos? That's your mental consciousness. That's where the workshop is. That's where all your thoughts and memories and feelings and emotions and unconscious and subconscious and instinct and opinions and viewpoints, that's where everything is stored. That's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. Everything is stored there, and countless memories from countless lifetimes. The Buddha says nothing goes. There's two ways that our mental consciousness kind of stores information. This is my way of putting it. One is a qualitative one of karma. The negative or positive imprints have a certain way of functioning. The other way is just bare bones memory. There's nothing we've ever seen, heard, tasted, touched, smelt, or thought about that goes astray. It's stored as memories in the mind, which is why we can develop clairvoyance and eventually see the minds of all beings when you're a Buddha and you removed all obstacles from the mind. Your mind now can see the universe crystal clear. I mean, it sounds hilarious. This is the Buddha's observation. It's the potential of the mind. So the mental consciousness is what we have to learn to become familiar with, to unpack and unravel and deconstruct and reconfigure gradually into the mind of a Buddha by removing the delusions and growing all the virtues and the wisdom and the goodness, which is at the core of our being, which cannot be removed. So sensory is profoundly limited, but we give it massive power. And this is the thing, but everything, so you wake up in the morning and you start seeing things. Just seeing, forget the other senses. Is it not? So we see a million things a second. It's blue, pink, yellow, this, square, round, person, ugly. And what we do is, ugly, beautiful, nice, delicious, this. And we believe it's coming from the eye consciousness. Don't be ridiculous. Your eyes can't see ugly and beautiful. Your eyes see shape and color. This should blow our minds. It proves nothing has an intrinsic nature. It's just a bunch of shape and color. You know that if a person's lost their memory, I remember one woman, not so much losing her memory, there's a certain part of the mind, for example, we could call it discrimination, which is the ability to discriminate between this and that to the tiniest degree. This woman gradually stopped having the ability to distinguish what's a vase from this, from that, no sense of space. She was like frantic. She could not cope. She had to try and use other ways to remember there's a teapot and there's this. So losing discrimination means you can't tell one thing from another. Therefore, you don't know what to call it. That's mental. That's not eye consciousness. So that shape and color appears to my eye, and this is what happens in a millionth of a second, quicker than Google. I'm not joking. It says 22 million, in 1.5 a second. Quicker than Google. You can't beat this one. Lama Yeshe says in Mahamudra, when we've really begun to taste the nature of our mind, it is more intelligent, more brilliant than any computer. As if you can see every atom in the universe when you've got some concentration even. So shape and color, that's happened. And then in the millionth of a second, your mental consciousness is accessed, and I dredge up my memory. It's all there, and I know the things I like. It's called black, it's called round, it's called this, it's called a thermos, and I think it's well designed. And out my mouth comes, oh, what a nicely designed thermos. We live our lives like this, and then we don't think that it's a view we've got. This is the thing about mental consciousness at the gross level we live at, conceptuality. They're opinions, a viewpoint, concept, thought, opinion. They're a viewpoint. It is a nicely designed thermos. It's a viewpoint. He is ugly. It's a viewpoint. We live in a bunch of viewpoints, and then we believe our viewpoints are true. Look at the world. We're hilarious. We should be embarrassed how silly we are. Buddha says we have to learn to see what's real and what's not, and that's the source of happiness. It sounds hilarious, really, to think that why you're not happy is because you're not in reality, not in touch with reality. It's fascinating. That's the Buddha's deal. So, okay, mind acts like a mirror, reflects, and what's in the mind determines the way things will be reflected back to you. It's pretty obvious. So, all right, now the Vajrayana model of the mind, another way of discussing the mind now, we've got different levels of cognition, levels of capacity. We've got gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, and what they call very subtle or extremely subtle. It's just levels of capacity of cognition. The gross is literally the sensory consciousness. It's the grossest level of all, the most coarse level of our cognition. Ear consciousness, blah, the five. Now that comes along inextricably linked to gross physical, gross body, which is this bag of bones. So the death process is described in gradual process of deconstruction from the gross to the subtle to the very subtle. It's described in 8 stages. Another way it's described in 25 stages. There's sort of 5 things that occur at each stage. Can't be quite like that. Must be 5 and then 4 or something at each of the 8 stages. So gross consciousness then is the senses, and that depends upon the gross body all the bits working nicely. So the death process is, as I said, is described in terms of 8 stages, and the first 4 stages of this deconstruction process, they call it the dissolution, if you like, deconstruction of the components, the pieces of me. You gradually, first of all, you know, at each of those stages, several things cease. And what's utterly fascinating about this is that this process of death is exactly the same as the process of going to sleep. Exactly the same. Things happen physiologically, just the same. That's why the yogis, and we can all learn to try to, the yogis certainly can get in touch with this experience and go through that process without losing consciousness, without losing cognition. You go to subtle levels, but you don't lose the ability to be cognizing, whereas we just go to sleep and snore for 8 hours, have a few wacky dreams and wake up again. So the first thing to finish, the first thing to cease, and we know this experience. And I'm sitting there talking, you know, to Claude, and I'm tired. First of all, your body feels very heavy, doesn't it? So one of the things that ceases at the first level of this death process is your body gets very heavy. It feels like lead. The other one is your eye consciousness ceases to function. I'm sitting watching Claude. I'm sitting upright, watching, looking at him. And you know, when you're tired, you kind of like you can't see things everything's not very clear, is it? You're losing your capacity to see even clearly. Now, the next stage, there's more things happen at the first stage. I'll go through them all. But the next stage, your ear consciousness begins to cease. You're still sitting upright, and you just missed the last 10 seconds of what he said. We all know that experience. You're still sitting upright. All the bits haven't all finished yet, you know. So each of the senses, so the eye consciousness ceases first. Your earth element ceases. Your body starts to get weaker and heavier. Other things occur as well. In this course note you've got, this is in there, it's all described in whatever chapter it is. The second level, your ear consciousness starts to go, and your earth, water element and the liquids begin to dry up in your body. You know yourself when you wake up in the morning, which is like reverse process, your mouth's very dry, your eyes are dry, because the liquid, the liquid element, the liquid water elements begin to dry up, you know. First earth, then water, and the ears. There's just a couple of things at each stage. The third stage, your fire element ceases. The heat in the body starts to go. This is a death process. And then your capacity, your earth, air, earth, water, fire. Then also your eyes, your ears, and the third one is your nose consciousness, smell. The fourth is the air element ceases. You stop breathing. The tactile ceases. Air element, your breath goes in and doesn't come out. And by that point is what we think is death. But you're not dead yet. That's just the gross consciousness. And that's the equivalent of being fast asleep. But death, the breath even stops altogether, you know. But you're not dead yet. And this is a crucial thing to really take on board if you want to do, because in relation to what you do with your animals, with your mummy, at the hospital, many things, if you can take this view, you know, this view that the mind is now gone to the subtle level, but you can't see evidence of it because it doesn't depend upon the brain. This is why a person in a deep coma, like I said, my friend in hospital, Judy, deep coma, not capable of hearing, quote unquote, but vividly recalled those words I said, because your subtle consciousness, which is your mental consciousness at this level, can exist without depending on a brain. And that's the part, this is the point that radically differs it from the Buddhist, from the materialist view. And I read at the time I was doing editing Lama Zopa's book, I read a book by an American journalist, a medical journalist called Dick Teresi. And he's a very funny fellow, cracking jokes all the time. His expertise was death. And people wondered why he wasn't always depressed, but he was always laughing. Anyway, he's a wonderful man. And he did all this research. And his book, it's called, he wrote this book called The Undead. And this weird, wonderful subtitle. And it actually was, now it was about all the conflicts and confusion now in the American medical profession about just when death does occur, you know, because of all these things that there have always been experiences of people coming back to life, people having vivid experiences in the unconsciousness of being under anesthetic, all of these things, people seeing now that maybe death isn't as simple as we thought. One doctor in this profession, he said, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but I can say that. So I think it's great that people are talking, you know, about all these things. He interviewed all the different religions, but he never interviewed a Tibetan Buddhist. They're the ones with the most sophisticated knowledge, I would suggest, you know, but he didn't. I kept meaning I'd write to him, but I never got around to it. Anyway, it's a very fascinating book, very funny. It was very wonderful because we know in history, in all cultures, there are explanations, aren't there, of stories about people, quote unquote, coming back to life. You even heard about in England, they had people were buried with a bell, in case the inconvenience of being dead and you wake up and you, excuse me, I'm still here. Apparently it's not uncommon, but that would be very horrifying, wouldn't it? To wake up in a coffin and you're not dead. You will be soon, but I mean, how horrific. Many stories like that. People know, people have experiences of near-death experiences. All the signs of life seem to go, but you come back again, you know. That's one of the things that really causes contradictions, he said, in the medical profession. You think you're dead, they're ready to cut your liver out, and you inconveniently come back to life. What a drag, you messed up the whole plan. And he was quite cynical, unfortunately. I don't mean unfortunately. From his own experience, he was quite cynical about the bad side of this industry, of misusing people, manipulating, you know, quite kind of being elitist, arrogant, misusing people, the one of getting organs, the whole business of cutting out organs, you know. I know in Europe now, many countries, they've made it the law that you will give your organs. You have to now say you don't want to give your organs. I think it's quite heavy, you know. Many people don't even know that. Do you understand? So anyway, it's interesting. I'm quoting this man, you know, in the profession. So there's a whole chapter also, whole chapter on out-of-body experiences. People all over the world report these out-of-body experiences, they call, or while you're on your operating table. A common one is that you're totally anesthetized, not possible that you can actually hear with your ear consciousness, can't feel, but they report these vivid experiences. of knowing what the doctor said, and people are cynical about it, but he said, he joked and talked about this one particular woman who had the most vivid experience. But but from their point of view, she had to have such a radical procedure that from there, they had to stop all the organs, and there's no way from their point of view she could possibly be conscious. But she reported the most vivid out-of-body experience. Now, you can't argue with those things. You just can't argue, you know. So it forces you to have to reaffirm your look freshly into your assumptions, isn't it, about what is conscious and what is not. So I think it's great that this is happening now. So in this one chapter, like I said to you in one of the sections of the book, there's a whole period of what to do once your breath has stopped, your loved one. So what do you do if your loved one dies at home? What do you do if your loved one dies in hospital? What do you do if your loved one gives their organs? These different scenarios. So that's a fascinating one. So this is, he had one example of one woman, because what happens? You go through the death process, you stop breathing. You're not dead yet, so I'll finish these 8 stages. At this next stages, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, it's just this gradual getting more subtle of the mental consciousness, the subtle levels of your mental consciousness. Brain has stopped. So there's no evidence of this. But you might, and then they go through the ever more subtle stages, ever more subtle stages, ever more subtle stages. And then eventually you get to very subtle consciousness, all the grosser levels, the levels of your physical and mental being have now all subsumed to this very subtle consciousness, very and inextricably linked with this very subtle physical energy called the wind, the subtlest of the 4 elements. This is the system. This one of the 4 elements is the one that's similar to the Chinese acupuncture system, the Ayurvedic system, the Tibetan medical system. So gross consciousness is inextricably linked with the gross body. Subtle consciousness, your mental states, are inextricably linked to the subtler physical energy, which is consisting of a subtle nervous system of like 72,000 channels coursing throughout your entire body. Within those channels are coursing all these different wind energies, prana, and then these doctors can analyze all these different wind energies. This is the basis of your health. This is similar to the acupuncture one. And it's these wind energies coursing through all those channels, along with these wind energies, are your different states of mind. This is clearly not neuroscience, a very different view, you know. So you go to your Tibetan doctor and she'll feel your pulses, and she can feel exactly the imbalance of certain winds. She knows exactly what they are, and she knows that's related to your attachment energy, which is out of control, which is why you're having panic attacks. She knows this particular wind's related to your anger, while you're always exploding all the time, because the mind and the winds at this subtle level are inextricably linked. And it's a really sophisticated system, the way it's described, you know. Like I said, it's not neuroscience, that's for sure. It's a completely different model. So this subtle body, as they call it, consists of this nervous system, the wind energies coursing through the nervous system. And then they call about what they call this subtle red and white drops, they call it, chigle in Tibetan, or kundalini in Sanskrit. So this is red and white subtle liquid energy going through these channels as well, but the white one predominates at the brow, at the crown. Okay, sorry, I missed. Roughly speaking, this subtle nervous system, the 72,000 subtle channels, there's a central channel, as they call it, which if it starts at the crown, if your spine went all the way up, it's just in front of your spine, goes all the way down, ends at the penis for the boys and the cervix for the girls. Then you've got the 2 side channels, start here and go up and then go all the way down the central one along the sides, and then there's all these others all going throughout the entire body. Then you have these different chakras at different points, which is nothing fancy. It's just it's a constriction of a whole bunch of the channels all knotted together at the crown, brow, throat, heart, below the navel, and then now along the penis for the male and internally for the female. So then this red and white subtle energy, liquid energy, that at the time of conception in your mother's womb, or wherever it is, I've heard it's the fallopian tube, I don't know these things. the egg and the sperm actually have this subtle, the male one has this subtle white drop. It's a subtle physical energy. And the female one has a subtle red drop. They call the red and white drops. And then when your consciousness comes from the past life and through the intermediate state, and when mummy and daddy hop into bed, your consciousness runs there and joins that egg and sperm. And your very subtle consciousness joins that very subtle, the indestructible drop, the red and white drops. And then you start at the heart chakra, right at the center of your chest. This is how they talk. And then you gradually, as a fetus, you gradually develop from there in the womb. So the death process, everything gathers finally at the heart chakra, where this indestructible drop is, this red and white drops that you got from mummy and daddy, and your very subtle consciousness conjoined, is like locked in there. That's how they say roughly. So death, finally, that could be 3 days after you stop breathing, is when the red and white drop open and your very subtle consciousness, or the clear light consciousness, then that second, that's the end of you, and it leaves the body. It leaves the body. It can leave the body, your consciousness can leave the body through the crown chakra, through the eyes or the mouth or the anus or the penis, the sex organ. It leaves at different places. And these can indicate the type of rebirth you're going to get. And then it will take a reverse process through those 8 stages, and you'll wake up in this intermediate state, which is just the same as a dream state, the same experience, but more intense as a dream state. It can be very fearful, can be very horrible, can be very blissful, depending on the karma that was created. And then you're bopping along up to 7 weeks in that intermediate state, human kind of conception of time. And then when your new mummy and daddy hop into bed, and these days, I don't know, they're all having discussions about if you're conceived in a petri dish, what has to happen. Some lamas say, I've discussed with different people, some say that you've got that egg and sperm from the petri dish have to be in a womb in order for the conscious to go there. Others say that it can join in the petri dish, so it's different viewpoints about that. So this one experience of this woman who was on the operating table, she was giving her organs. This is the thing about the organ one. As Lama Zopa says in the book, let me just quote you from Rinpoche. Where's my glasses? There we go. I've got my wrong glasses. I can't see properly. Never mind. It's all right. Where are we? What to do in the hours and what to do once the mind has left the body. No, it's not yet left the body. If your loved one is going to give their organs. Okay, good. Chapter, page 125. All right. What to do if your loved one's going to give their organs. Well, Rinpoche says, so some people decide to offer their organs to others after they've died. Does this disturb the mind? So it seems that when the person is considered brain dead, the doctors keep the body breathing artificially, and they continue to keep the body breathing when they actually cut out the organs. I question this. The brain may no longer be functioning, but if the person has the karma to breathe, even if artificially, this means they have the karma to be alive, which means the mind, the subtle consciousness, is still there. Also, as we discussed in chapter 7, even when the breath has stopped and someone has been declared brain dead, people have been known to come back to life. This means that the usual definition of death is wrong. This is a big question that needs to be discussed with learned great meditators. The hospital needs to be careful. Remember when Rinpoche said that? I wanted to say more. He said, no, just say that. Hospital needs to be careful. However, if the person's brain dead, which means the gross consciousness has ceased, they may not feel anything when the organs are cut out. I mean, in other words, I know this experience I'm about to tell you about this woman having an experience on the operating table. I've had operations and I was fast asleep. In fact, it was the best sleep I've ever had. I wish you'd get those over the counter. I mean, it was the deepest, most profound, heavenly sleep I'd ever had. And it was like 1,000,000 years long. It was so delicious. You don't understand? What do you call it? It's anesthetic. Can you buy it over the counter? You can't, can you? I couldn't get over it. It was so heavenly. I had no vision of anything going on, People do. You understand? So anyway, so you might not feel anything. But this is the point. It's in the cases where people, like this experience I'm about to tell you, that's when it's dangerous. That's when it could be a problem, because it could freak the person's mind out and then reverse their karmic process, and they'll leave the body in fear, and then they'll get a bad rebirth. That's the problem. That's the essential problem. But as Rinpoche says, but on the other hand, he's saying it's incredible. All the lamas say that. It's an amazing gift to want to give your body to others. And he never doubts that side. It's incredible to want to give your organs to others. It's so special, so incredible, such a good way, such a pure motivation to have, you know. So this story, this one woman, he quoted in this book. She quoted in the book. And there's so many people have this experience. This woman who wanted to give her organs, so she was, and once she stopped breathing, they kept her breathing. So she looked all toasty and warm, but they call her dead. Whereas the Buddhist view, if she's warm and toasty and can breathe, it's because of her mind. In other words, keeping the brain going, keeping the organs going, means you keep the mind in the body, right? If it were actually dead body, meaning the conscious had actually left, you could never get it to breathe. It would not be possible. It would be impossible. So anyway, this woman called brain dead. And what was fascinating, the nurse, so there she is on the operating table, okay? She's unconscious, like you are under anesthetic. She's unconscious. That's a fact. Her senses cannot feel anything. But her mental consciousness is still there. Subtle mental consciousness, like the dream mind, like in the coma. Do you understand? So then this nurse who was monitoring the heartbeat, so the moment they got the circular saw to cut her open from head to toe to take out her organs, her heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. And the author joked, I wonder what a dead person has to be anxious about. So that for me, I was using this Buddhist model, that's an exact indication. It could be an indication that she was in fact conscious at the subtle level, observing, like so many have reported, what's going on during the operation. So there she is, still alive. She's still Mary. She knows she's still Mary. She's observing these doctors from above her bed. They have the feeling of being out of your body, although technically you don't leave the body. You just have that experience of leaving the body, but you're not leaving the body. If your mind actually did leave the body, you'd be dead. But you have the experience of as if you're floating above, you know. So she's observing them. She knows she's still Mary. She knows she's going to give her organs because that's all there. She's aware, but then she's realizing they're cutting her out. So she's having a panic attack. But I'm not dead yet. What are they doing? Then that could completely freak her out, which it did. Her heart went to 200 beats. So the thing is, the point here is, as Rinpoche says, which I haven't begun to, I have been discussing, that the time of death is so important. At this period between the first four stages, about the second or third stage, when your ears are starting to go and you've still got your wits about you, that's when this other process kicks in, which I'll go into more detail about. And that's when intense grasping kicks in, really powerful grasping in the 12 links. We'll go into this. It's another process, and they're kind of moving along together. And intense grasping naturally rises because you're actually beginning the death process. So this ancient habit of attachment kicks in, intense attachment, and therefore fear arises. So it's at that point, that fear, that grasping is the catalyst for the number 2 of the 12 links, which is karma, and that triggers the karmic seed. So if you're there with people helping you, supporting you, and you've still got some fear, but they're supporting you, and there's virtue in your mind, you're hearing mantras, then it'll be a virtuous karmic seed that's triggered. So for this woman, because her motivation was so pure, would have been a virtuous motivation, she would have died peacefully. But she's not dead yet. Her mind is still there. And now that she's having a panic attack now, this is my deduction from the heart going to 200 beats, indication of panic, that can reverse the karma. That's why for my sister, the other way around, I know that this is about my sister, I'm not really private about my sister, but she was always sad about her own anger. Do you understand? She was always sad about her and had so much guilt about her own anger. We all have that. And who knows if she died? To die a violent death like that, to fall, as you're falling, as you're tripping, you're freaking out, right? You're not sort of blissful when you're falling. So that is the ego grasping strongly. That's this fear panic, fear rising, panic, strong grasping rising. And then she smashes her head. Now, if she died immediately, if she really stopped dead immediately, she was for several hours. My sister, who was a chiropractor, came and she was pulling blood out of her throat and, she was still alive. Then if it might have left immediately with that shock, with that upset or freaked out, that could have been triggering a negative rebirth. So I was so happy that her mind didn't leave her body, which means we could do prayers and practices to help reverse the karma. Do you see what I'm saying, people? So that experience I thought was very fascinating. Went for 100, 200 beats a minute. Many people, nothing, as Rinpoche says, most people won't feel it. It therefore won't be disturbing, it's okay. It's only in those cases where the people or they haven't actually died yet, they come back to life, Do you understand, people? So it's just an interesting point to consider. But from the point of view of motivation, it's marvelous motivation to want to give your body to others. It's incredible. It's so special. So any questions so far about what I'm just talking in different pieces all over the place, but are there any questions so far?
Yes. So when is the most appropriate time? I'm sorry.
For what, darling? For what?
For organ harvesting.
Well, okay, there's nothing, this process is fine, but because of the only reason it's difficult is in case that person is on the operating table, has an awareness of it, and it could freak them out.
Okay,
Because it's all very instinctive.
did that example that you gave us include the woman was still breathing, and she's still on artificial respiration? Or
I'm a bit confused. Start
well, I am
again.
too.
No, that's good. It's important. Let's get it clear. Tell me the question again. Tell me what you understood from what I said.
I just understood that there can be negative consequences for the wrong time.
Oh, no, okay, no, it's not a question of the wrong time. No, now I get your point.
Okay.
Okay, in the death process, you go through these 8 stages of deconstruction of all the components. By the 4th stage, when the breath has stopped,
Right.
heart has stopped, brain has stopped, that's what the West calls death. This view says no, even though there's no sign of life, your subtle consciousness is still there, and that can stay there for up to 3 days. So now what happens is, because they think the person is actually dead, they keep them breathing on a machine. But as far as they're concerned, they're not really alive, they're dead. But the Buddhist view is they are still alive, even if you're not artificially, you're still alive could be up to 3 days. So the point is, they think the person's dead. So on the operating table, it's fine. Most people won't feel anything, even if the person's breathing, right? Because they're keeping her breathing. They think she's dead. But this example of her heart going to 200 beats, I would suggest is an indication that she was one of the people. This is my point. I didn't make it clear. An ordinary person with an ordinary operation, they're still alive no matter what, but they're not conscious. So it's a surprise to hear that they showed that they were aware while they're under anesthetic. What I'm getting at here, I didn't make it clear, was even though you've got a person who's alive and under anesthetic, yes?
Mm-hmm.
That person can't feel the knife, can they? They can't feel it, can they? Because they're under anesthetic and their sensory consciousness has ceased.
Right.
But some of them report that they observe what was happening. You with me so far? So that's a surprise to the doctors, because they think, well, you can't be conscious because your brain is not functioning. So the same with a person who's actually technically more radically gone, and they're dead, but you're keeping them breathing. They think they're dead, but the Buddhists say they're still alive. That woman was still alive. So her subtle consciousness, in just the same way that a person under anesthetic, she could also be observing what's going on, even though she's. Are we communicating?
Yeah, I'm still just not sure. Like,
so which piece are you not sure?
Where the safe space is.
There's no safe space. Because you can't be certain that a person won't have this experience of observing what's going on. So but most people might not have an experience of it. Are you seeing the point?
Yes, I just don't know, I guess, what the scientific, in this conventional world, conventional reality is how much time you have when someone is in whatever death phase they're in to harvest.
Oh, that's why they keep them breathing, because there's no time. Once you've stopped breathing, they say you're dead. But the fact is, the Buddhist view would be, if a person's mind is still there, and it's 2 days after they stop breathing, they won't rot. So you could even take their organs out then, but that's not from the Western point of view. You've got to keep them breathing artificially so they stay warm and toasty. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see now. Thank you.
So I wasn't so clear about this, the experience of a person under anesthetic. All I'm saying is that's exactly the same as a person who looks like they're brain dead. Their mind is still in their body, and they will be able to have an experience. That's why Lama says it's to be careful. It could be dangerous because it reverses. It could freak the person out. It could freak the person out and reverse the karma. That's the point. That's the only reason it's difficult.
So if you're dying at home,
what, darling? Why is it echoing? I'll turn you off here. Doesn't help. Keep talking. Go.
So if you're dying at home, which seems to me preferable,
yes,
surrounded by peace and stillness and warmth and all that, then
Is it possible to stop the echoing? Is it possible to stop the echoing coming from the room that she's hearing on the computer? We're all hearing the echo of the questioner,
I don't know why.
Yeah, I can hear
I-
everything you're saying. I hear everything.
but it's happening.
Oh, okay, I know why. I'll mute myself. Sorry, that was,
There you go.
There we go.
That's it. Okay. So start again. Say the point again. Go on.
Just that, you know, I'm in thinking of my own death and
Yes,
my friends.
that's right.
If there is a choice of either dying at home or dying in a hospital.
Okay. Yes.
Then I would think that organ harvesting would be pretty difficult at home unless the Monty Python came.
If you want to give your organs, no. If you want to give your
But
organs,
then-
then you need to die in obviously in a place. So are we clear about why there's a problem?
Yes.
Most people won't have a problem because most people won't have an experience of an out of body experience.
Right.
They won't have. Most people will not be disturbing. But those, this is my deduction, that's all. Because the fact that heart went to 200 beats, they would just say it's some kind of chemical reaction, but it's the presence of mind still there up to 3 days. So and then the key point is, the Buddhist view, the person, if you can keep them breathing, it means their mind is still there. By definition, they're still a living person, even though it's artificial. That's the point. That's the point. And the other point is, because, I won't be long, 2 questions, I won't be long. So, but because this is the point again, the key thing is, as you go through the death process, I'll read you from Lama Zopa's book in a minute on that. There's 2 things going on, 2 systems. One is from the Vajrayana point of view, one is a sutra point of view. And the sutra, at the same time as the 8 stages is happening, this other explanation of things is happening. It's called the 12 links of dependent arising. These go on, is Buddha's way of just describing how we live our life day to day. This leads to this, which leads to this, which leads to that. But they play a particular role at the time of death, Lama Zopa says. So at the time of death, about the second and third stage, as you're losing the plot, you still got the plot a little bit, and you can still hear this the 9th link called grasping, which is a very powerful level of attachment, that kicks in really powerfully. And then that, because it triggers fear, because you're afraid of losing I, that then becomes the catalyst for the karmic seed, number 2 link, that will be triggered, that will determine your future life. So it's quite technical. It's at that point that your future life is determined before you even stop breathing in the past body. And it's how you die that determines it. So they even say, as Rinpoche points in the book, if a negative seed is triggered and you've still got your wits about you, then the way you appear is evident that it's a negative seed that's been triggered, because you're seeing your future suffering life coming. You'll have panic attack, you'll freak out, you'll see you'll be screaming, you'll be clinging to your clothes, you'll be tormented because you're still not dead, but as your mind's getting more subtle, the negative seed has been triggered and you're seeing your future suffering life coming. They talk like that. And then if it's a virtuous seed that is triggered at that time, death will be very blissful. I always remember the way Steve Jobs' sister described. I love Steve Jobs, and I read a report from her that she went there the day he died. And he knew he was dying. You could see from the talks he gave, he was really into impermanence and everything. I also heard that he was a Buddhist. I don't know if that's true, but I know that in another book I read, which was by a memoir of one of his daughters from a previous marriage, she went there one day to visit him and he was in sick. And there was this Brazilian, I think, he's a friend of mine, I can't think of his name. He's been formally recognized as a reincarnated Lama. He's known as Rinpoche. Sergei Lama or something, I can't think of his name. He lives in San Francisco, has a Dharma center. He's a lovely man. He's a healer. Well, he was there with Steve. So I thought that was nice. Anyway, the day he died, he's lying on his bed, as skinny as a rake. He had liver cancer or something, and all the family were there. And she came, and she said he was packed, ready to go. So you could argue, because he knew he had cancer, he was ready for death. And this is what I found fascinating. So she was just sitting here, let's say, and pretend you're Steve, and his 2 daughters are looking at Steve, and he's looking into their eyes, and I can see your eyes. She said he looked at them with such love, not grasping and panic, and begged them to forgive him for leaving them. Do you understand? Not like attachment and panic. And then she said he looked into the distance and he went, "Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow." And then he died. Like that, just died. Boom. Well, that fits exactly with what's happening. At that time, there he was, and he's already going through the death process, beginning it, and suddenly the grasping kicks in and it triggers a virtuous karmic seed because his mind's full of love and compassion. It triggers a virtuous karmic seed, which means already he's triggered the karmic seed that'll determine his future life. It could be a Buddha's Pure Land, it could have been human birth, whatever. But because it's a positive result, and then because your mind's getting more subtle, your mind is more aware of things like that. You can see it coming, in other words. And so he's looking radiant, and he died a blissful death. That's the best way to die. And that means when you're peaceful or virtuous or feeling compassionate, your mind is peaceful, and that'll trigger a virtuous karmic seed, one of your virtuous karmic seeds. And then already that process, it'll be a very blissful experience. A friend of mine died in California years ago, an Australian bloke. He was working with the center there, Vajrapani, and he was on the roof and he fell off the roof and he's in his arms of his wife and he died there. She said he was radiant, which means he is dying. The process starts, the grasping kicks in, triggers a virtuous seed, and he sees his future life coming. Are we communicating?
Yes.
It's very fascinating. And this is the same for animals. Because as your grosser mind is ceasing, your subtle mind becomes more evident. Sometimes you can have these vivid dreams where you don't even know if you're conscious or not. It's in and out of dreams. That's where you're going from your gross to your subtle to your gross to your subtle. Because subtle mind is more powerful. Because when the conceptuality and the sensory ceases, it's kind of got out of the way, so you can access your more subtle level of mind. And it goes much subtler than that too. But one of the capacities of that subtle level is to see more distance, see more clearly. Are we communicating? Are we communicating? There's questions here, I know. Just a second. You go on. You talk to me now.
No, I was just going to mention.
Okay. You later.
Oh,
go on. Go.
I was just going to mention that I've had 6 surgeries on my eyes, where they cut the muscles of the eyes and reattach them. And in my 5th one, I was under anesthesia, and then all of a sudden, I was awake, but I was asleep. And
I understand. You could see what they were doing.
Stitches on, like them sewing.
Oh, okay. But you didn't feel pain.
Eyeball.
But you didn't feel pain.
No.
There you go. Because your sensory consciousness was not.
And so when I had the 6th one, I said, I just want you to aware that I was conscious that.
What'd they say?
They're like, okay, well, we'll work on that and give you more.
Yeah.
But it was literally,
I know, but you didn't feel it, did you?
No, I felt the tug.
Yeah, but you didn't feel much pain. It would have been exquisite pain otherwise. Pardon?
It was hard. It was
no, but it wasn't outrageous, exquisite agony. Like, for example, I'll tell you another example.
It was discomfort.
No, okay, I know. Okay, that was probably mostly conceptual. There's this example of one woman. I remember there was a certain drug they use in the drugs where they use on death row to kill people, and they first zonk them out, make them paralyzed, so they don't upset the watchers and become hysterical. I mean, excuse me, it's hardly for the person's sake. And this particular drug, they don't even use it on humans. They use it on animals, apparently. And sometimes it can fail. No, sorry. Sometimes the anesthetic can fail. So this woman, she had to have an eye operation. They gave her this paralyzing drug first, which means she could not blink, do anything, utterly paralyzed. But the anesthetic didn't work. And she lived in this exquisite agony. And so you didn't have that.
No, I had.
So I think you had something.
It wasn't.
So what I'm explaining,
it was essentially
Claude, what I'm explaining is it wasn't your eye, it wasn't your physical, it wasn't your tactile consciousness experiencing pain. It was your mental consciousness observing it, and maybe even some conceptuality there about it that was sort of like so vivid. Because it would have been like that for that woman. The pain she couldn't even describe, and she couldn't move an inch to prove it, to show it, Can you imagine that? Because her physical body was still working. Do you understand? Very fascinating. That's a good experience. Thank you for telling us. Yes, behind. His second darling. Just behind, the man. What's your name?
Brian.
Brian. Go Brian.
So I want to go back to this very subtle consciousness.
Start again.
Very subtle consciousness that you talk about.
Yes.
That leaves the body, goes in eventually in the body.
I can't hear so well, Brian. Can people hear on Zoom what he's saying? You can. Good. Go on. I can't hear you so well. I'm a bit deaf in my right ear.
So we talked about the death process, both from the Western perspective.
Yeah, and this Buddhist one, yeah, sure.
And the Buddhist one is that you can stop breathing if you're a very advanced yogi or practitioner, and you can still enter a meditative state for a period of days, sometime until the white and the red drops exit your body. And at that point, your subtle consciousness then leaves your body, as I understand it, and goes somewhere.
In a so-called intermediate state, like a subtle dream state.
Right, so it goes into an.
So that's the question?
State.
Mm.
So my question is, going back to this discussion of organ donation.
Yes.
And the question of, clearly, we keep people on respirators and their hearts beating because if we don't give them oxygen to their organs, the organs will die. But the subtle consciousness, or very subtle consciousness, still exists and still survives.
Yes.
But it is somehow contained in the vessel still at a time when functionally all of the organs do not work anymore.
That's right, exactly.
So my question is, from a Buddhist understanding or Buddhist perspective, often we associate the heart chakra and the heart with this subtle consciousness rather than our brain and our mind. So where or is there anywhere that we can understand that this very subtle consciousness resides in this vessel?
Yeah, it resides at the heart. Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay, this model, forget the brain now. Gross consciousness is your sensory consciousness, conjoined with a physical body. You've got to have one, you can't have one without the other. That ceases, so you stop breathing. So now your mental consciousness is still existing, and that's what I said, it's going through all these channels, in the 72,000 subtle channels in the body, the subtle nervous system, and all these different wind energies or pranas are going through all those channels, and your different states of mind are inextricably linked to those wind energies. So it's a very different model. It's not the brain. So your different states of mental consciousness are connected to those winds, and the gradual next stage is fifth, sixth, and seventh, gradually from more and more of the side channels, everything gradually stopping. The mind's getting more subtle, more subtle, more subtle. The wind's getting all absorbing, more absorbing, until eventually everything comes to the very subtle consciousness, and the very subtle wind inextricably linked, the very subtle consciousness, very subtle wind, and that is residing at the heart chakra in this red and white drop that you got from your mummy and daddy at the time of conception. It's literally residing right there.
So when we speak of wind channels, I understand.
Sorry?
When we speak of these wind channels.
The channels, and then within those channels are these wind energies going through them.
Okay, we speak of wind energy.
Yes, prana,
Talk
they say.
a little bit more about these wind energies.
Yes.
And what happens with these wind energies during this last 4 stages.
Okay, they gradually, so first of all, a fully awake person, here we are, all you've got your nervous system going from every tip of your body, every part of you, this subtle nervous system is going through all the bits. As you gradually, as the pieces deconstruct, one way of describing all of it is gradually the winds go away from all the side channels and come into the central channel. So that's when you're fast asleep. That's when sleep has come, and you touch, you open the eye, nothing happens. So the grosser consciousness have ceased, and all those winds are gradually all leaving all the side channels and all coming into the central channel. And the 5th, 6th, and 7th stage, gradually the winds are going down and coming up, and everything finally, and the states of mind connected to those subtle winds all finally cease. And everything, all that's left is the very subtle consciousness at the heart chakra, inextricably linked to the very subtle wind. And the red and white drop that are there, that they're in, when that opens, that's when death is. That's when you leave, and you're carrying all the karmic imprints since beginningless time of all your different karmic imprints. You carry those with you, and then you go into the intermediate state. You go through the 8 stages reverse. You kind of wake up in this kind of dream state like you do in your sleep, and then when the mummy and daddy hop into bed, you run to the next rebirth.
So you also mentioned that where the red and white drops exit the body.
Yes, determines and will be an indicator. So if your consciousness leaves through the crown chakra, that could be an indication you're going to be born in a pure land, which I'm going to talk about. If your eye consciousness leaves through the eyes, that's an indication that you're going to get born as a human. Mouth is an indication you'll be born as a hungry ghost or a spirit. Anus and sex organ is either the animals or the hells. So you can't stop, and you can't see that, you don't know. But often, sometimes they say a head moves, and maybe the mind is there for 3 days, it's quiet, then you see the head move. That could be a sign that it's left through there, or through the eyes, you know. Okay. So it's described in great technical detail in all the texts, of course. And of course, this is the observation of the great yogis and the holy beings, you know. So yes, and this on...
We have some online questions typed in. So let me,
yeah.
let me read the typed in questions first,
Okay.
and then Lou can do her, she's going to speak for herself. The
Okay.
first typed in was, if we prepare for death and have done spiritual work in this life, and we die a seemingly traumatic death, will a karmic seed be planted, or, well, that's how they, can a karmic seed be planted is how it was worded. So you've done spiritual work in life, you die an unexpected traumatic death.
I understand. It's sort of like this, you know. If you don't know how to drive a car, or you just learned a little bit and you're on the freeway and you're crashing at 100 miles an hour, you'd have a pretty traumatic time because you don't have any tools. You don't know what to do. You haven't got much driving skills. Would you agree with that? But if you've driven for 47 years and you've got your wits about you, you could argue that you still be able to keep your wits about you a little bit perhaps and not have a total mental breakdown at the time of crashing. It's not impossible. So the same here, if you've got a spiritual practice, honey, and you've practiced virtue and you've kept your samadhi, you've done all your practice and you have a difficult death, it doesn't mean you'll be fearful. Anyway, even an ordinary death, fear rises, grasping rises, which brings fear. But if you've practiced, it is logical that you'll be able to cope with whatever arises. That's the point. That's what you're practicing for. That's what you're preparing for. You can't say for sure, but pretty much it's logical. It's not some kind of unjust or just thing that's going on. It's just logical. You're prepared for it because you already know you're dying. You lived your life even knowing, like we talked last night, you're ready for death. You're not afraid of death. You've practiced virtue. And then that means by practicing virtue, by doing your purification every day, you are creating the causes for it to have a good death. It's not some accident that's set in stone, you're going to have a fearful death. It's due to virtuous karma that you'll have a good death. So it's not unlikely things will go well and you'll handle it. And even you could have a traumatic accident. But I remember, I guarantee you, if you're a mother driving a car and your baby is strapped into your back seat, I guarantee you'll have a blissful death because you'll only be thinking of your baby, not of yourself. You see my point here? That's compassion. You get my point? So it doesn't follow that because you have a traumatic exact accident that you'll be self-centered. Do you see my people, what I'm saying? Yeah? Okay. I remember even myself, I'm not a holy being by any means, but I remember one time, because even if you just practice dealing with reality and not being afraid of things and facing things, I remember having this experience of nearly, I was in New Mexico somewhere, driving a big van, and a car went against the red lights. I was moving forward, and he came around turning right. It was like within a millionth of a millimeter, I was driving through, and somehow I was completely clear, crystal clear, and made a clear decision to go in a certain direction and avoided the crash, and it wasn't fearful. So it's possible. If you train and learn, death is not innately suffering. As if you train and learn, you'll be ready for it. You with me, people? Yes. Go on then. Lou. Hi, Lou. Talk to me.
Hi. Thank you.
Good.
I wonder how the introduction of painkillers, say when you're in the hospital at the time of death, people are often given something to try to alleviate their pain.
Yes.
How does that affect the karma at the point the subtle consciousness leaves the body? Does it interrupt?
It's a really big point, Lou. It's a huge one. The ideal scenario is to be as clear as possible. I mean, it's the same if you're about to crash. You don't want to be on drugs. You want to be as clear as possible, so you can keep your wits about you and make some wise decisions. Same with death. So, the ideal is to be not totally zonked out of your brain. This is one of the tragedies, I suppose. I mean, in old people's homes and in hospitals, is it not true? We drug people out quite regularly, Oh, isn't she so peaceful? But you can't drug the mind. The person will they'll have just scary dreams, that's all. Because your mind's scared, you can't make it go away. You understand? So really,
Yes.
It's really important to be as clear as possible, as conscious as possible. That's the ideal. So you've got to have to then find the way to get a balance between. We really got to realize, I think, there's a big difference between pain and anxiety. We assume because there's pain, you're going to be anxious and worried. It just doesn't follow. And that's a major thing in our own lives. We assume, of course, I'm angry, I've got a knee ache. No. Anger is a response to it, and you can change your response. So if you've practiced all your life and you've practiced dealing with, suffering and dramas, and you've got pain at the time of death, give drugs, not just to make the person unconscious, but give drugs to alleviate the pain, but allow their mind to be sane and clear. That's the balance to get. It's so important.
Thank you.
That in a way is the tragedy, I think, of just zonking people out of their brains and these old people's home, or giving them televisions all day, blasting away,
Yeah.
Because we don't really understand this business of attachment, I think. We don't have such a fine understanding of its function and how it causes so much fear. So by helping the person's mind, helping them be safe and secure and comfortable and peaceful, then the pain isn't as much. The physical pain isn't always the main source of the problem, in other words.
See.
The mental worries, the fears of the mind. If you can help the mind, then you can help the pain as well. Are we communicating?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So who was in the room here? I had a question. Yes, sweetheart.
When my mother passed away, I was not with her, but my brother was.
Yes.
And she was in her home, and he said that at first she was afraid when the process first started, and she knew it was happening because
she was what? She knew what?
Cancer.
Okay.
She knew that her time was short, and but then he held her in his arms and comforted her, and she calmed.
Good.
And by the time she actually passed away,
quite calm.
She was calm.
Good.
But my question is, the next day I went to the funeral home where her body had been taken, and I stayed with her body most of the day. And I just held her hand and stroked her hair and talked to her and said some mantras.
Yes.
And I felt certain that she communicated with me a couple of times.
I understand.
Does that happen sometimes?
That's not impossible. Of course, it's not impossible.
I felt she was still there.
No, I know. That's a very common.
There were some things that happened.
Yeah.
Like the lights flickered and these.
I understand, darling. No, I hear many stories like this, especially from people in hospitals. So many people say, you just know when she's gone. You just know when she's gone. You know she's still there. So common. I think that's not impossible. That's really, and especially if you're being a bit compassionate and a bit sensitive, you'll be aware of these things.
Yeah.
I think so, definitely. Same with the animals.
I was certain that these things were not just coincidences.
I understand, darling.
She was actually letting me know that yes, I am still here.
Oh, I see. I understand.
I know that you're here with me.
I understand. Yes.
But you say that to people and they're like, oh.
No, I know exactly. And we can also make fantasy. So it's it's also so we'd have to be clear what we're talking about. I know I tried to work that out with my sister, but I felt nothing at all. I couldn't tell if she was there or not. Still, I had no idea.
So when a person is agitated when the process starts, like my mother was, but then becomes calm.
That's a good sign. No, that is a good sign. In fact, there's one other story. A friend of mine, a nun up in Cairns in Northern Australia, up in the tropics. She sits with people who are dying. And she talked about one example of one fellow, like a classic example of incredible fear and shitting and freaking out and eyes panic stricken, because he's seeing, like you could argue, he's seeing future suffering rebirth, really intense. But then he calmed down and he died very peacefully. And so she told one of her teachers, her lamas, and he said, oh yeah, probably by having that fearful experience, he's purifying some negative karma, but then the karma changed and he had a happy rebirth. Lama Zopa said he had a similar experience with somebody. Yeah, that can be also. Yes.
So in the book, he talks about giving and taking as something.
One of the techniques,
yes. And so I'm curious about if you're bringing attention to the grasping that is going on, how does that jive with actually doing the technique?
I think that technique is only, first of all, you do it if you've got to have a fairly, as Ramesh says, you've got to be very courageous to have that view that there you are sick and dying, and you want to meditate on giving your happiness to others and taking upon yourself their suffering. That's a pretty advanced mind. Mostly we're fairly self-centered and fearful. So that's before you're unconscious, before you have stopped breathing. If you've got that kind of mind that has compassion and wants to take your own present suffering and imagine you're taking everybody else's upon yourself, that's pretty, hang on, I can't see you. That's pretty intense. That's pretty special. So not everybody would be able to want to do Tonglen. So it's not going to be disturbing you. It's only if you are fearful, that would be the wrong practice to give a person. You get my point here?
Mhm.
Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It wouldn't, I mean, so if you're giving it to the wrong person who's got lots of fear, you would not give that. They're bad enough having their own suffering. They don't want to think about taking someone else's as well. But if a person has that kind of compassion, that could be a marvelous practice for somebody. And you die very peacefully because you've really got compassion. It's like the mother driving the car, all she's thinking of it is her baby. You understand? She'll almost be happy to have any suffering and not have her baby have suffering. That doesn't affect that doesn't trigger grasping. It triggers more compassion. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Okay. Who else? What time is it, people? What's the plan?
We go until 12:30.
And what time is it now?
It's 11:37.
I think we can have a quick break.
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's not a tea break, cookie break, or is this a pee-pee break? Which kind of break is it? A tea and cookie break. Okay.
It can be all three. But when we come back, we do have a question
We
online.
have lots of time. We're going to be spacious, you know. So have a 20-minute break or something. Relax, okay? And if you want to talk about this stuff. Make it like discussion group.
Okay, there's coffee and tea on the front porch, and
I'm sorry that people on Zoom can't join us. We'll come back to your question later, Donna. Okay, darling? Yes, I know. So I'll see you guys in 20 minutes. Bye.
Can I bring you anything?
I'm deciding whether I'm going back or sitting here.
Okay.
I think I'll go back to my house. Thank you so kind, darling. Thank you so much.
Okay, so she wants to go 20 minutes, which is going to bring us to noon.
Yeah.
So since she's going up to the house,